Hi, it's John Kelly. In this module, we are going to discuss confidence, precision, and performance materiality. And as always, we want to be efficient and effective, follow professional standards, and document what we have done properly. Now, we'll start out by defining confidence and precision. And if there are any actual statisticians listening to this, most statisticians would go crazy when they see how auditors apply what we call statistical sampling, because we're never quite right in how we do it, at least from the perspective of a statistician. But we're close enough, given that we're allowed to use some judgment in how we select our procedures. So confidence is how sure we are about our estimate. In auditing, we would want to have a high level of confidence. That's sometimes referred to as a 95% level of confidence. Used to be in some professional standards, not in professional standards anymore. Precision is the measure of how much our estimate can be out. And in auditing, that's materiality. So we might say 95 times out of 100, I would like to be within $100,000 for the financial statements, or I would like to have a high level of confidence that the financial statements are within materiality. They're not misstated by more than a material amount. And before we go much further, again, when does sampling and/or statistical sampling work in an audit? Well, it really only works well in a large, homogeneous population. And many times audit populations are not large homogeneous populations. And if we decide to take a sampling approach in those circumstances, we're going to find that sampling is time consuming and it may not be effective. Though the attractiveness of it is that it produces some pretty math and some pretty documentation, and I think that's sometimes why people want to do it. But my view would be don't impose a sampling approach on every audit section. It's going to be inefficient and ineffective perhaps, and it will probably annoy staff. So not a good idea. So the options that professional standards give us, 500A52 says 3 general ways. We could select everything, and that would work well for a large population that was made up of 2 or 3 items. We're really not going to sample. We'll look at each of the 3 items. Or we could select specific items. In other words, we have a large population. There's 3 or 4 very large items and the rest are very small. We might just pick the 3 or 4 large ones. Or we might do audit sampling. And audit sampling must be random. And 530A13 says we could do statistical sampling. That's okay. It's time consuming, but it's acceptable. We could do some kind of systematic selection, dollar unit sampling. That would be okay. And it also says that haphazard or judgmental sampling would be okay. So nothing in professional standards says we have to go for statistical sampling, and it certainly doesn't say we have to do it in every audit section. So let's take a very simple approach to how we might determine sample size, and I think auditor judgment would tell us that as materiality gets bigger, sample size can be smaller. And so that would then give us a very simple formula. Sample size is equal to population value divided by materiality, and that could give us some very simple guidance as to how big our sample should be if we were sampling. But what if we find errors that are not corrected? And materiality is precision. That's the amount of error we can miss, and we intend to miss by not testing everything. So by the time we're finished the audit, if we found nothing, we say, well, I didn't test everything, so there's a possibility that there are a material amount of errors that I didn't find, but I'm okay signing the audit opinion because that's materiality and the users wouldn't care. So if you used materiality of $100,000 and you found $20,000 in error, potentially you could have a problem. And either what you would have to do at the end of the audit, you'd have to say, oh no, what I really meant about materiality was that it was $120,000, $100,000 plus the $20,000 in error that I found, so I'm okay. Or you have to go back and re-audit to a lower materiality of $80,000 because you found $20,000 in error and the client refused to correct it. Now, what a statistician would do if they were coming up with a sample size, they would deduct expected uncorrected error, or EE, from precision, and our formula would then become sample size is equal to population value divided by materiality less expected uncorrected error. And of course, the bigger EE gets, the bigger the sample size gets. Now, a statistician would be very careful and would have a factor that they would increase EE by against the possibility that the actual error found exceeds expected error. Because if the actual uncorrected error exceeds expected error, you've got the same problem you had before. And now you've got to go do some more work. An auditor might take a look at last year's summary of unrecorded adjustments, increase that amount by a bit, and hope that by the time they've completed the audit, the actual error they found was not bigger than their guess at the beginning of the audit. And again, a reason to get the client to adjust everything. Now, the definition of performance materiality in 320A12 is you have to reduce to an appropriately low level the risk that the aggregate of uncorrected and undetected errors exceeds materiality. So if I want to put that in a mathematical formula, expected uncorrected errors and undetected errors got to be less than materiality. And if I decide that I'm going to set performance materiality to be undetected errors, then performance materiality is materiality less expected error. Now then my formula becomes sample size is equal to population value divided by performance materiality. And I like that. That's a nice formula. But remember I said at the beginning that we have to deal with precision and confidence. This deals only with the adjustment to sample size due to precision. We also need to adjust our sample size for confidence, and that will depend on our assessed level of risk of material misstatement. Now, what happens if RMM is high? A statistician would say that the formula should then become population value divided by performance materiality times a confidence adjustment factor. And by coincidence, the factors range from around 1 for 50% confidence to 3 for 95% confidence. And my only observation there would be, I don't know why we would ever do a test to 95% confidence, because that would mean that we were pretty much absolutely sure that the balance was completely wrong, which isn't what we normally mean by risk of material misstatement being high. And second, we're ignoring any evidence that we might get from other tests, and we're trying to get all our audit evidence for this one particular assertion in this one particular section from just one test. And if we looked at the other tests we did, we would probably find that some evidence is being generated from other testing, so we would never have to get up to 95% confidence and never have to multiply by 3. So our first choice for an auditor. An auditor says, well, I want to deal with precision and confidence separately. That auditor would then say, I'm going to set performance materiality as materiality less expected error and get everything corrected if I can. And then I will separately deal with confidence by increasing sample size depending on the assessed level of risk of material misstatement. And that means then that I can set a single performance materiality for the audit as a whole, and I can keep my understanding and my definition of performance materiality simple. Another auditor might say, well, no, I want to do all of this through performance materiality, and I find that confusing, but never mind. And the auditor might then say, well, I'm going to reduce performance materiality by a half if risk of material misstatement is moderate, and I'm going to reduce it by a third if it's high. And then I'm going to have many different performance materialities set throughout the audit file by section, by type of transaction. I'm going to have a large number of different performance materialities. I might even have different performance materialities for different assertions in different sections. Now, if you look at it, that's exactly the same formula as before, except it confuses materiality and mixes up precision and confidence. So the two choices are in fact mathematically identical. The reason I like the first choice is it's simpler for me to understand. The other observation I'd quickly make about materiality and performance materiality: in a small audit, materiality is often very low, let's say $5,000. And it's not hard to find a $2,000 error. You missed a payable of $2,000. That could easily happen, and you could easily find it in the audit. Well, suddenly performance materiality is $3,000. So performance materiality very quickly gets very low, and sample size very quickly gets big and perhaps too big. So the two solutions are: one, correct all errors, so you don't have to worry about performance materiality being much below materiality, or two, consider, if given the small size of the audit and the small size of the populations, whether a sampling approach is appropriate at all, and go back to just judgmental sampling. So, thanks for listening.